So, now what? Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, or if you are new here, then please do me a favour and hit that subscribe button. So, before the off-season started, there were plenty of free agent quarterback targets, that me and other Browns fans were talking about. Guys like Sam Darnold, Justin Fields, Daniel Jones, Jameis Winston, Jacoby Brissett, Matt Jones, Gardner Minshew, and of course Kirk Cousins. Well, every single player that I just named have all signed with teams not named the Cleveland Browns, and Kirk Cousins still isn't even a free agent because the Falcons think paying him a $10 million roster bonus to hopefully get a day free pick for him is less embarrassing than just cutting him. Breaking news, it isn't. Another name that was floated around the last few weeks was Russell Wilson, someone who, at first I don't think was on a lot of fans' radars, probably due to the whole stigma just surrounding Russell Wilson at this point in his career. However, I do think as the dust kind of settled a little bit, he was someone who, along with Kirk Cousins, did make sense from a veteran bridge option that would, fit the offense that the Browns and Stefanski want to run. However, it was then reported that he did sign with the New York Giants on a 1-year, $10.5 million deal worth up to $21 million in incentives, right about pretty much where I thought his market would be. I spoke in my last video, I think it was, about the Tony Grossi report about him wanting 20-30 million a year. As I said then, that was pretty unlikely. I thought it was more in the 10 to 15 maximum range. And obviously he got 10 million from the Giants. What are the Giants doing? I think a lot of people are asking. They have obviously, of course, already signed, Browns legend, shall we say. Any quarterback that beats the Steelers is a legend in my eyes. Jameis Winston. And now they've signed Russell Wilson. Does this change their plans in the draft? I don't think, in a vacuum, these two guys would stop you from drafting someone. But it might maybe make you think that, do they think the Browns are going to just take Shedeur Sanders at 2, and that's why they wanted a backup option, essentially, which is a battle between Jameis Winston and Russell Wilson? Or does this not change their draft plans at all, and they still want to draft Shedeur maybe and go into next season with a quarterback room of Shedeur Sanders, Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston, which, would objectively be a pretty hilarious quarterback room, to say the least. But, back to the Browns, the only options left, I suppose, at this point, for acquiring a veteran bridge quarterback, is either acquiring Kirk Cousins or signing Aaron Rodgers. So basically it's Kirk Cousins. I'm kidding, kind of. Whatever happens at this point, I do think that if the Browns, sign a veteran, then it probably won't come until after the draft now, which of course is a bit of a shame with someone that wants to, has been talking about how we wanted to talk on this channel about a quarterback signing, which we now might not get until after the draft. Kirk Cousins has a no trade clause, and probably wouldn't waive it unless he knows he's going somewhere. He doesn't have a first round draft pick sat behind him. He just went through that with Atlanta, and is the reason why he's now leaving. So he's not going to want to go through that again. So whilst I've been in the camp of not drafting a quarterback at 2 for most of the offseason, I do think that, if they don't do that, then it could indicate that a Kirk Cousins signing, is shortly coming after the draft. Is that something I would do? I mean, my heart would rather put my hopes and dreams in the hands of a draft pick than Kirk Cousins, if I'm honest. But from a realistic perspective, if the Browns don't go quarterback at 2, then I would probably give up a day 3 pick to bring in Cousins as a bridge to hopefully, whatever quarterback they took day 2, basically. I've said for most of the offseason that if Kirk Cousins was released, then he would probably have made the most sense as a bridge quarterback option for the Browns. You could have got him very cheap, of course, with the Falcons paying him over $25 million to not be on his roster. If that's what they had done, the Browns could have likely done the Russell Wilson contract that the Steelers did last year and just pay him the minimum. And whilst I would personally rather not have to give up any assets to get Cousins, at this point, I'd likely consider giving up a day 3 pick if that's what it takes to get a bridge quarterback, which is something I never thought I would ever say. Of course, I was joking earlier. There are some other options, guys like Joe Flacco or Carson Wentz maybe. But I will be honest, they are pretty underwhelming, to say the least. I enjoyed the Flacco experience in 2023 as much as anyone, but I just don't think that a full season with a 40-year-old Joe Flacco would look like people would hope it would. Maybe I'm proved wrong, but I just personally don't see it. And as for Carson Wentz, I've said multiple times over the past weeks, if you're one of my subscribers and have watched my previous videos, you'd have heard me talk about this. He would literally have been near the bottom of my list when it comes to quarterback targets. Just really uninspiring, man. Just not really something I want to see. Don't get me wrong. Of course, if they do draft a quarterback at 2, then I would get it, I suppose. But, I still would rather not have to potentially, watch Carson Wentz start a game for the Browns next season. Not something I'm particularly interested in, and I don't think many Browns fans are. So what should the Browns do? As I said earlier, I do think it's likely that we might not get a signing now, until after the draft. If the Browns do sign someone like a Carson Wentz, then that would somewhat influence my opinion on whether they plan on drafting a quarterback at number 2 or not. And, vice versa, if they don't sign a quarterback and go into the draft with just Kenny Pickett and Deshaun Watson with a recently re-torn Achilles, then I'd be more inclined to think then, they plan on not going quarterback at 2, and instead, maybe going later in the draft and then acquiring Kirk Cousins. As always, I could be way off, and maybe they have that much belief in Shedeur Sanders or another quarterback that they don't feel the need to sign another quarterback, or they could still sign a Carson Wentz and draft a quarterback day 2 instead of the first round. Who knows? That's just my 2 cents on it. But in regards to what I would probably personally do, I've said all off season now that I would draft Abdul Carter. He's my favourite player in the draft. I think he's the best player in the draft. I understand the arguments. I'll probably do a video soon about the whole, Abdul Carter versus drafting a quarterback debate. Don't get me wrong. I would absolutely love to be proved wrong and they drafted Shedeur Sanders or another quarterback and they proved to be a really good quarterback and, the franchise quarterback for at least the next 5 to 10 years. Of course, that is the dream scenario. I wish that's what happens, but from a realistic perspective, I personally don't see that. So I've been in the camp of draft Abdul Carter over a quarterback. So for me to sit here and say they should just sign Carson Wentz and draft Shedeur Sanders at number 2, would be quite silly, because I don't think that is what they should do. But at this point, it would be silly also to not, admit that it's getting pretty thin at the options. It was all good to sit there at the start of the off season and say that I'd rather, look to draft a quarterback day 2 and sign a veteran quarterback. But now, the veteran quarterback market is a lot smaller than it was back then. But I did also say back then that my number one option, the one that made the most sense, was Kirk Cousins. And funnily enough, he is the one still available, mainly because Atlanta are just being, quite incompetent with how they're handling that situation. So that's probably where I would still look to go. Give Atlanta a 6th round pick. The Browns have a million of them this year. You might have to pay a little bit more in the salary. You might not. But, if it costs you a 6th round pick and a 5th round pick to bring in a Kenny Pickett and a Kirk Cousins to, be the other 2 options in a room with that, as I said, hopefully a day 2 pick. In my opinion, at this point, probably a Jalen Milroe. I know, quite a funny quarterback room that would be. But then I think that's, reasonable compensation to acquire a decent bridge option, a somewhat decent third option, as I've spoken before with Kenny Pickett, to, surround a draft pick. But again, also, that doesn't also rule out drafting a quarterback at number 2. I'm not one of these people that, just because I want to draft Abdul Carter and think that's what the Browns should do, I'm not going to hate on anyone for them wanting to, the Browns to draft a quarterback. I completely understand it. As I said earlier, I wish that I'm proved wrong and they do draft a quarterback, and they're really good. But I just personally am in the camp of Abdul Carter instead of, a Shedeur Sanders at number 2, because at this point, maybe Cam Ward I would maybe consider more. But I think it's more than more likely that he gets, selected before the Browns, number 1 overall by the Titans. There's obviously been some talk about the Browns maybe trading up to number 1. That's something I, again, probably wouldn't do. I don't think the Browns should give up assets to get one of, any of these quarterbacks in this draft. So, yeah, that's what I would do in terms of that. I wouldn't trade up. So, at this point, as I said, I think the few options left for me, I would more likely than not, probably if it takes a 6th round pick or whatever day 3 pick it takes to acquire a Kirk Cousins, that still doesn't change your plan on a day 2 option at quarterback. But as I said earlier, I don't think if they draft a quarterback at number 2, then yeah, more likely than not, they've already signed the Carson Wentz or a Joe Flacco, because they would not be bringing in a Kirk Cousins. I don't think he would be coming to the Browns if he knows that, they're drafting a Shedeur Sanders at number 2 to sit behind him for the first 6 games, breathing behind his neck. Every interception he throws, there's going to be Shedeur Sanders' name chanted by the fans. Not something he's going to do. He has a no trade clause, so he can actually make that decision instead of the team. So, but as I said, I'm getting a little bit off track, but back to the original point in regards of what I would personally do. As I said, probably still go with Kirk Cousins and draft a quarterback day 2, but would always love to be proved wrong. But that would do it for me today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you do enjoy my content, then please drop this video a like, hit the subscribe button. It's free, but it really, really helps out my channel. You can also check the links in the description to see where you can follow and interact with me on social media. As I always say, I'm trying to build a community of Cleveland Browns fans, and even if I only get to talk to one fan a day, I'm happy, because I'm talking Browns football with the best fan base in the world. Thanks again for watching, guys. Have an amazing rest of the week, but most importantly, go Browns.